is because he chose to have faith even against all reason. So he ditched the ethical life and thought that the life of faith was the main thing, and that was because you had to live an authentic life. Even Sartre would refer to being authentic as believing that you yourself make your own choices. You're never being forced to choose things by anyone else. That's being inauthentic for Sartre, thinking that I have to do this. This is the only thing I can do. I can't do anything else. That is inauthentic. You have to always realize that every choice you make is your own choice, and you're the one that has to choose what will be valuable in your own life. Nietzsche is the same way. He's got some interesting peculiarities, though, because he feels that the individual who gets to choose his own value is the next evolutionary step above the merely human. The merely human are people that live in that cathedral, the corrupt tomb of the dead God. Why dead? Well, not only is the God dead because, of course, Christianity is a Greek-influenced religion that believes that Jesus died for our sins, right? We have killed him because of our sins. He dies on the cross in order to save us. So we have killed God in the Christian religion. But Nietzsche argues that the reason we have killed God is because we no longer believe in those old religious narratives. So God is dead not because there was a God and that God has been killed, but instead because mankind has created these stories based on the idea that there is a God, and that story enabled society to develop and develop and develop. But eventually we've gotten to the point now where we understand that these were inventions by men that were primarily there in order for us to answer questions, kind of like Hobbes suggests, that we can't answer, so we invent stories to explain them. But thanks to science, we've gotten to the point where we don't need those explanations anymore. We no longer believe in that God, and we no longer live in a society that needs that kind of story. So we have killed the need for that kind of story about God. Instead, now, the focus should be on those individuals who are educated enough to understand this story, and the story is that those stories have been supplanted, and now you're the one that has to create your meaning for yourself. You can't just rely on somebody else's story. They're using you. They're treating you like sheep, or as some people say, sheeple, right? You're just doing what they tell you to do, like an idiot, basically. And instead, what you've got to do is create value for yourself. Now, here's the problem. If you create a story for yourself that says, I have value because I'm doing this job, well, if people come to expect that of you, and then you do it because they're expecting it, you've trapped yourself in an old story that you've created, and now you have to be that way. You lose your power over your own destiny because of your own entrapment, because you created a self that now everybody expects you to be. So what you have to do is avoid being the same over and over again. You have to constantly renew your meaning in your life by coming up with a new narrative for the moment. I mentioned, by the way, a perfect example of this is Madonna. She refers to herself as a Nietzschean. I mentioned this already once, but notice she constantly has to reframe herself. She's reinventing herself constantly from one type of Madonna to another. And when she even is interviewed about this, she explains that that's precisely the problem. She doesn't want to meet your expectations. She always wants to surprise you, because she wants to be the one dominating the situation by creating a new kind of value. Because it's only in that kind of activity that the meaningful life, for Nietzsche, is really there, that you could feel that kind of artistic power, where you're creating something new and something powerful. By the way, there's an interesting issue called the eternal return that Nietzsche discusses. The eternal return. In one sense, what this suggests is that an individual can think that in the universe their life is eternal, and everything you do is going to be eternally reproduced again and again and again. So everything you do is eternally what you were going to do throughout your life. And if you think about what you're doing as eternal, the significance for you of making the right kind of choice, doing the right kind of thing that will give you true value in your life, is more significant. And another approach to that is to think, well, but you're constantly choosing a new value, and that's going to go on for all eternity. I'm not sure which way to interpret what Nietzsche actually meant. So this is referred to as the Übermensch, by the way. And just for fun, my quiz question to everyone is, what do you think it would be like living the life of an Übermensch? How would you feel if you were an Übermensch? And by the way, if you're studying philosophy today and you go past Kant and past Hegel, it's kind of expected that you're going to be an Übermensch whether you like it or not, because you're of the situation now where you believe that the meaning in life, the stories that we create, that we explain to one another, that are either our religious beliefs or if you think, well, science is the better narrative today, which actually I'm sure it is the better narrative. The thing is, some scientists feel like science as a narrative has trumped religion, and the religion has no longer any value to us, and that science is just pure knowledge. Well, that's bunkus, actually, because you can't be a good scientist unless you have a set of values. And where do those values come from? They don't come from science. Science is a knowledge of facts, and values and facts are two different kinds of things. Remember the question of, is this a good water cup or not? You might think, oh yeah, it's a good water cup, but then somebody else has a different opinion, and you can't prove that their opinion is wrong when it comes to values. You can prove opinions are right or wrong when it comes to measurements. How many ounces does this cup hold? What's the material made of? All that kind of stuff. Those are scientific facts that we can all agree on. But if we're deciding whether it's a beautiful cup, an ugly cup, anything where value is concerned, notice that that's an opinion question. And so as a result, when you're trying to be a good scientist, that's an opinion. What kind of good scientist is a good scientist? There's lots of different kinds of opinions. Should you invest your life in making poisonous gas so that you can kill people better, more efficiently? Well, that's all factual maybe, but is that being a good scientist? Should you create an atomic warfare device, a nuclear bomb, for example, that will, blow up Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Oppenheimer, if you think of, if you saw the movie Oppenheimer, here he is creating a device which many of the physicists in the Manhattan Project were concerned that if it follows a certain interpretation of our calculations, could actually destroy the world. So when we blow this first bomb up, this first test, it might just destroy the entire world. Well, but let's try it. We got to find out, right? Maybe we'll blow up the world, but that's probably just, a small percent, 5% chance that we'll blow up the entire world. We got to find out whether this will work or not. Are they being good scientists? I remember when they were studying to see if they could create a black hole in Texas. They had a lab. They wanted the funding from the government to build this lab that would enable them to study black holes, where they were going to try to create a black hole in Texas. If you've read about black holes, you know that they just suck everything in. And once you're in the hole, there's no way out. And I could just picture Texas going, sucked into this black hole. That's ridiculous, but scary at the same time. Why would you even want to try to do that, considering the possible results of that sort of thing? Good scientist? What is a good scientist? An honest scientist? A scientist that makes lots of money? I don't know. Well, that's an ethical dilemma. And ethical dilemmas have to be solved through, ethics. And where does ethics come from? From narratives. We today think of all ethics as narrative-based. You have a story, remember, that says, this is the way the world is, this is who I am, and this is how I can continue to be the best I can be, right? I have a narrative, a story that I believe. Man is man, homo neurons, man the story maker, right? So if I'm following a story, no story is true or false. Some stories are better than others. Some stories lead you to accomplish more, perhaps. Some stories are better because they're more attached to reality, although some of our best stories are not, right? So the question, of course, then is, well, what is a story? What's the whole reason for man making stories? And by the way, if we go back to ancient times, what we see is that man in all of our ancient societies taught one another through stories. And that's still the case. So if we go to the various societies that we think of as primal or primitive, right, where the primacy of nature is the way that people live, stories is pretty much the way they talk and train one another through stories. Religion is basically a narrative. So my definition of who is religious is to say that a person is religious because of what narrative they believe, right? And so science is actually a narrative. You can't escape it. And so science, there's lots of different branches of science, but there's lots of different narratives associated with it. I think I mentioned Richard Dawkins giving a lecture here a few years ago up in Fairbanks. Richard Dawkins is an atheist, although he jokingly refers to the flying spaghetti monster, which some people believe in. This is obviously a fraud, but they refer to themselves as pastafarians. Flying spaghetti monster. There's a religion called Rastafarians, so they're punning on that. In any case, I attended the lecture where he led about 400 people in the audience, and there was an overflow crowd in another room watching him on a screen up in Fairbanks. And it was a very religious occasion. People were literally jumping up out of their seats and saying, "I'm saved," except they were saying, "I'm an atheist," We're saved because the narrative we believe doesn't believe in a higher authority. Instead, our highest authority is individuals not believing in a higher authority. So you can't really escape that dilemma. How did I get into this? The Übermensch. The Übermensch